There is a person in your life right now, maybe at work, maybe at home, maybe in your own family, and who drains you, who tests you, who, despite your best efforts, makes you feel like a worse version of yourself. And here is what nobody tells you. The Stoics had a direct, almost ruthless answer for exactly this. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics. Today we're exploring one of the most practically powerful teachings. This ancient philosophy offers not on death, not on ambition, not on fate, but on people, specifically difficult ones. Because if we are being honest with ourselves, the greatest threat to our peace of mind is rarely circumstances. It's people. The colleague who undermines you, the family member who provokes you, the stranger online who seems to exist purely to disagree, the person who, no matter how many times you extend goodwill, returns it with hostility. The Stoics were not naive idealists. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire. Epictetus was a slave who endured brutal mistreatment. Seneca navigated the court of Nero, a man who would eventually order his death. These were not philosophers sitting safely in ivory towers, writing about hardship from comfort. They lived it. And what they discovered, through suffering, through leadership, through relentless self-examination, is a framework for dealing with difficult people that is so elegant, so psychologically sophisticated, that modern therapists are still catching up. In this video, we're going to walk through that framework step by step. Stay until the end. The final principle may change the way you see every difficult person you've ever known. Let's start with the most common mistake we make when someone is difficult with us. We make it about us. They said something cutting, and we spend the next 4 hours mentally replaying it. They were dismissive in a meeting, and we walk out questioning our worth. They were passive-aggressive at dinner, and suddenly our entire evening is held hostage. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, a private journal never intended for publication, writes with almost brutal honesty about this trap. He reminds himself again and again that the disturbance never comes from outside. It comes from within. He writes that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Now, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the instinct is to dismiss it. Easy to say, Marcus. You were emperor. But remember, Marcus was writing this to himself during active military campaigns, political betrayals, plagues, and the deaths of children. He was not writing from ease. He was fighting daily to hold this truth. Here is what the Stoics understood that most of us don't. When someone behaves badly toward you, two things are happening simultaneously. There is their action, and there is your interpretation of their action. These are not the same thing. They happen in two completely different places. Their action happens in the external world, which the Stoics called ta ektos, the things outside us. Your interpretation happens inside you, in what Epictetus called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, your mind, and only one of those two places is yours. This is not passive resignation. This is surgical precision. By refusing to automatically convert someone else's behavior into your suffering, you are not becoming a pushover. You are becoming unconquerable. The question is never, why are they doing this to me? The question is, what am I choosing to do with what they've done? At the very beginning of Book 2 of Meditations, Marcus Aurelius writes something that stopped me cold the first time I read it. He writes, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Now, before you call that bleak, read the next line. He continues, they are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind and possessing a share of the divine. This is premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. The Stoic practice of mentally rehearsing difficulty before it arrives, not to become pessimistic, but to become unshakeable. Think about what this does psychologically. Most of us operate on an unconscious assumption that people will be reasonable, fair, and kind. And because we hold that assumption, when they are not, when they are petty, or cruel, or small, we are blindsided. We feel betrayed. We feel like the world has broken a promise it never actually made. Marcus refuses that setup entirely. He wakes up and says, "Some people today will be difficult. I already know this. I am not surprised. I am prepared." And here is what makes this ancient practice remarkable in the context of modern psychology, because researchers studying emotional resilience in the 21st century have found that the single greatest predictor of emotional recovery after conflict is not personality, not intelligence, not even emotional intelligence. It is expectation management. People who mentally prepare for social friction recover from it faster, feel less personal threat, and respond more constructively. Marcus Aurelius was practicing cognitive immunization 20 centuries ago. But notice, and this is crucial, he does not stop at "they will be difficult." He adds something that utterly transforms the exercise. They are like this because they cannot see clearly, not because they are evil, not because they are your enemy, because they are, like all of us, operating from imperfect understanding. This changes everything. The difficult person in your life, have you ever considered that they might not be acting from malice, but from blindness? Epictetus opens the Enchiridion with one of the most important sentences in the history of philosophy. He writes, "Some things are in our control and others not." We hear this often. We quote it, we put it on mugs, and then we proceed to spend enormous emotional energy trying to control the one thing the Stoics explicitly tell us is not in our power: other people. Let me be direct with you. You cannot make a difficult person stop being difficult. You cannot force someone to see reason. You cannot legislate someone's attitude toward you. You cannot make a hostile person kind, an envious person generous, or a closed-minded person curious by wanting it hard enough, arguing well enough, or performing perfectly enough. This is not cynicism. This is the most liberating truth in Stoic philosophy. Epictetus, who spent the early decades of his life as a slave, with literal physical constraints on what he could do, understood freedom not as the absence of external limitation, but as the complete and total ownership of your inner response. His master, the notoriously cruel Epictetus, once twisted Epictetus's leg as a demonstration of power. Epictetus reportedly said calmly, "You are going to break it." It was broken. Epictetus said, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" No rage, no begging, no collapse. Now, I'm not suggesting that level of detachment is immediately accessible to any of us, but the principle it points to is one we can practice right now. When a difficult person does what difficult people do, when they are cruel or petty or unreasonable, their behavior lives entirely in the domain of things not up to us. It is to ektos, external, beyond your control. Your response, your inner posture, your words, your decision about whether to engage or withdraw, that is prohairesis, your faculty of choice. The one thing that is entirely inalienably yours. This is where Stoicism becomes practical in a way that changes daily life. Stop asking, "How do I make this person different?" Start asking, "How do I choose to respond in a way I can be proud of, regardless of what they do?" This is not weakness. A person who responds from principle, rather, then reaction is not passive. They are the most powerful person in any room. They are the only one truly free. Before we go further, I want to ask you something genuinely. Is there a specific type of difficult person you find hardest to handle? The aggressive one? The passive-aggressive one? The manipulative one? The chronically negative one? Drop it in the comments below. I read them, and it genuinely shapes what we cover next. If this is resonating with you so far, please consider hitting the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells YouTube this kind of content is worth sharing. Now, back to the Stoics. Of all the difficult emotions that difficult people provoke, none is more dangerous or more misunderstood than anger. And no Stoic wrote about it more carefully than Seneca. In his treatise De Ira, on anger, Seneca writes something extraordinary. He calls anger a brief madness. He says it is uncontrolled, forgetful of decency, unmindful of personal bonds, persistent and diligent in whatever it begins, closed to reason and counsel, agitated by trifling causes, fit for neither good advice nor the weighing of what is just. Now here is the thing. Seneca is not only describing the anger of the difficult people around us. He is describing what we become when we let them provoke us. Because this is the cruelest trick that difficult people play, often without even intending to. They behave badly, we react, and now we are behaving badly too. They have transferred their chaos into us, and we walk away from the encounter feeling somehow like the villain. Seneca tells us to delay, not forever, not to suppress, not to pretend the anger isn't there, but to create a gap between stimulus and response. He writes that the greatest remedy for anger is delay, that you should ask yourself for a postponement. Modern psychology calls this the pause before response. Neurologically, when we are triggered, the prefrontal cortex, our reasoning brain, partially hands over control to the amygdala, the threat response center. The feeling is real. The urgency is real. But the conclusion we reach in that state is almost always wrong. Seneca knew this 2,000 years ago. He also gives us something else, something even more radical. He tells us not to use anger as a tool. In his time, as in ours, there was a common argument. Sometimes anger is useful. Sometimes you need to be fierce to get things done. Seneca dismisses this with elegant precision. He says that everything anger achieves, reason can achieve better, and without the cost. Think about the most effective, respected people you know. The ones who command a room not through volatility, but through calm authority. There is a reason we trust them with hard conversations. There is a reason difficult people seem to deflate in their presence. They have mastered what Seneca is describing. They have made peace their weapon. We come now to what I believe is the most philosophically advanced and the most personally demanding teaching the Stoics offer on this subject. It appears again in Marcus Aurelius. He writes, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" And then, elsewhere, he writes this: "How much more damage anger and grief do to us than the things that cause them?" But the deepest piece is this. Marcus repeatedly asks himself to look at difficult people not as obstacles or enemies, but as members of the same human community. He writes about the Stoic concept of sympathia, the idea that all rational beings are connected, that we are, in a profound sense, limbs of the same body. This is not sentimentality. It is not asking you to like difficult people, or to tolerate abuse, or to pretend cruelty is acceptable. It is asking you to understand something about human psychology that changes everything. Hurt people hurt people. Every person who has ever been genuinely cruel to you, and I don't say this to excuse them, was acting from their own pain, their own blindness, their own internal disorder. This is not a metaphor. It is the consistent finding of psychology, sociology, neuroscience. People who behave destructively toward others are not, at their core, powerful. They are suffering. Marcus, ruling an empire, holding life and death in his hands, chose to see the difficult people in his court, not as enemies to be crushed, but as people who had not yet found their way. Now, how does this help you practically? It helps because compassion and judgment cannot fully occupy the same mental space at the same time. When you move from "this person is attacking me" to "this person is struggling," and that struggle is manifesting as hostility toward me, you shift the entire emotional architecture of the situation. You stop being a victim. You start being a witness. And a witness has choices that a victim doesn't. Let's bring this to ground level, because philosophy without application is just entertainment, and the Stoics did not intend to entertain us. They intended to change us. Here are 4 practical Stoic responses to difficult people, drawn directly from the primary sources. The first, respond, don't react. Seneca tells us to create the gap. When someone says something that would normally trigger you, pause, breathe, give yourself 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, ask, if I respond from my best self right now, what do I say? Not your wounded self, not your defensive self, your best self. This single habit, practiced consistently, will transform your relationships more than any other single thing. The second, ask yourself what is actually in your control here. When you feel the frustration rising, the Epictetan question, is their behavior in my control? No. Is my response in my control? Yes, full stop. This isn't a rhetorical device. Make it a genuine reflex. The moment you locate what is and isn't yours, the pressure drops. The third, seek understanding before seeking to be understood. Marcus Aurelius writes that we should never be surprised by the difficulty of others, and that we should seek, as far as possible, to understand what they are experiencing. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. It means, before you decide how to respond, ask, what might be happening for this person that I cannot see? Not to excuse them, to equip yourself. The fourth, know when to withdraw. This one is often overlooked in popular Stoicism, but it is crucial. Epictetus is very clear. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every difficult person is yours to save or convert. Sometimes the most stoic response is to quietly, firmly remove yourself from a situation that offers nothing but ongoing damage to your own character and peace. This is not retreat. This is the wisdom to know where your energy belongs. Stoicism does not ask you to be a punching bag in the name of virtue. It asks you to be genuinely free, and sometimes freedom looks like a door quietly closed. I promised you something at the start of this video. I said the final principle might change how you see every difficult person you have ever known. Here it is. Marcus Aurelius, near the end of Meditations, writes something that I consider one of the most honest sentences ever committed to paper. He writes, and remember, this is a private journal written only for himself. Confine yourself to the present, and then in another entry, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And then, most honestly of all, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, the difficult person is not interrupting your path. The difficult person is your path. Every encounter with someone who challenges your patience, your equanimity, your sense of self, it is not a disruption from the work of becoming who you want to be. It is the work. It is the gymnasium Epictetus talked about. It is the resistance training for the soul. Marcus did not become Marcus Aurelius despite the betrayals, the ingratitude, the cruelty he witnessed. He became Marcus Aurelius through them. Every difficult encounter was an opportunity to either lose himself or find himself. He chose to find himself again and again and again. And here is the deepest turn. The question this philosophy ultimately asks is not, how do I handle difficult people? It is, who do I become in the presence of difficulty? Because that is the only question whose answer is entirely yours. The Stoics were not asking us to become emotionless, not asking us to become indifferent to injustice or to smile through abuse, or to convince ourselves that everything is fine when it isn't. They were asking us to become free, free from the reflexive suffering that other people's behavior can cause us when we hand them the power to determine our inner state. Free from the addiction to being right, being validated, being treated the way we deserve. Free to respond from our values rather than our wounds. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. None of them had easy lives. None of them were always at peace. They struggled. They failed. They wrote about their failures with a candor that, 2,000 years later, still makes you feel less alone. But they kept returning every day, in every difficult encounter, to this practice, this discipline of the mind, this choice to remain themselves. And that practice is available to you today, in your next conversation with the difficult person in your life, not to defeat them, to free yourself. If this resonated with you, genuinely, please share it with one person who you think needs to hear it. Not for the numbers, because this kind of philosophy spreads the way it always has, person to person, hand to hand. If you want to go deeper, we have a full video on Marcus Aurelius's Meditations and one on Seneca's Letters that pair beautifully with today's content. I'll link both at the end of this video. Subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics if you haven't already. We release new content every week. No noise, no filler, just the ancient wisdom that still holds. I'll see you in the next one.